I can't go to sleep with that. Like, what the? It's 9:30 and she's nowhere.
What's up, Henry? So when was the last time you saw her?
She was in the house.
Yeah, when was the last time you saw her?
9:30.
What do you do when the person asking for help might be the reason help is needed at all? The title says he believed he could outsmart justice. The thumbnail asks a simpler question: is my daughter alive? Because that was the question hanging in the air while police sat across from Henry Dinkins, a man presenting himself as a worried father figure, desperate for answers, while investigators were quietly beginning to suspect something far darker. Henry Dinkins was 47 years old when police first questioned him about the disappearance of 10-year-old Breasia Terrell. She had been staying the night at his apartment with her younger brother, DL. Henry wasn't her biological father, but he had been a consistent presence in her life, close enough that the arrangement didn't initially raise alarms. By morning, Breasia was gone. At first, this looked like something police see far too often, a missing child report filled with uncertainty, panic, and incomplete information. These cases usually begin with hope. Maybe she wandered off, maybe she was with a friend, maybe this would resolve quickly. But hope doesn't survive contradictions. Henry told officers he last saw Breasia inside the apartment. He said he fell asleep. He said he didn't know how she could have left unnoticed. Each sentence sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a story that didn't quite sit right. And that's the thing about lies built for convenience. They often collapse under their own weight. As investigators asked follow-up questions, small gaps began to appear. Timelines didn't line up cleanly. Certain details changed, not dramatically, just enough to matter. The kind of changes that don't scream guilt, but whisper it. Outside the apartment, worry spread fast. Breasia wasn't just missing. She was a child with routines, habits, people who knew exactly where she should have been. Her absence left a void that couldn't be explained away by chance. Investigators expanded the search. Officers canvassed nearby streets. Neighbors were questioned. Patrol cars circled the area again and again. Each hour that passed made one truth harder to ignore. Children don't simply vanish without a reason. And then came the first pattern interrupt: security footage. Not evidence of where Breasia went, but of who was moving when she should have been safe. Cameras in the area captured Henry's vehicle during hours that didn't match his account. The footage didn't explain everything, but it contradicted enough to shift the tone of the investigation. This was no longer routine. Investigators began treating Henry less like a grieving guardian and more like a person of interest. His words were documented carefully now. His movements were mapped. His demeanor, calm one moment, defensive the next, was noted. The question wasn't asked out loud yet, but it was already there. What if the danger wasn't outside the apartment? As the search intensified, the narrative Henry tried to maintain grew harder to protect. Every attempt to appear cooperative only brought more scrutiny. Every answer created two new questions. Somewhere between the missing posters and the interview room, the story began to change, and the most unsettling possibility of all started to take shape. What if Breasia never left that apartment on her own? And what if the man asking, "Is my daughter alive?" already knew the answer? Because the deeper investigators looked into Henry Dinkins, the clearer it became that the truth wasn't missing, it was being hidden. What happens when the person a child depends on most becomes the one no one can trust anymore. Before Breasia Terrell disappeared, Henry Dinkins wasn't seen as a threat. He was familiar, present, someone who had been around long enough to blend into the background of family life. That familiarity is what made everything that followed so difficult to accept and so dangerous to ignore. Henry wasn't Breasia's biological father, but he occupied a role close enough that few questioned it. He had access, he had authority, and most importantly, he had opportunity. To the outside world, he looked like a man helping care for children, stepping into responsibility when needed. That perception mattered because it delayed suspicion when time mattered most. Breasia and her brother DL were at Henry's apartment the night before she vanished. Nothing about that arrangement initially triggered alarms. Children stay with trusted adults all the time. The danger wasn't obvious, it was quiet, hidden behind routine. But trust has a way of blinding people to warning signs they only recognize later. When investigators began digging into Henry's background and behavior, they weren't searching for proof of guilt yet. They were searching for consistency, patterns, anything that could confirm or contradict the story he was telling. And that's where the cracks widened. Henry described the night as uneventful. He said the kids went to sleep. He said he woke up and Breasia was gone. But when pressed for specifics, exact times, movements, sounds, his answers became vague. Not outright lies, just soft edges where details should have been solid. There's a reason detectives focus on details. Innocent people remember panic, they remember fear, they remember the moment something felt wrong. Henry remembered convenience. As officers continued questioning him, they noticed how often his explanations shifted just slightly, enough to adjust to new questions, enough to stay ahead of direct contradiction. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, and that subtlety made it more unsettling. Then there was his demeanor. At moments, Henry appeared concerned, at others, oddly detached. The emotional rhythm didn't match the gravity of the situation. Not enough to accuse him of anything, but enough to keep him firmly in focus. Here's the contradiction investigators couldn't ignore. Henry wanted police to find Breasia, but resisted clarity when it mattered most. Security footage would soon intensify that contradiction, but even before that, something about Henry's role felt off. He wasn't just the last person to see Breasia, he was also the one controlling the narrative of her final hours. That kind of control is powerful. As officers expanded the search, Henry stayed close, present during questioning, cooperative on the surface. But cooperation doesn't mean transparency, and transparency is what was missing. At one point, investigators began mapping his statements against physical reality, timestamps, locations, known movements. The alignment wasn't clean. Each mismatch was small. Together, they formed a pattern that suggested planning, not panic. The apartment itself offered no immediate answers, no signs of forced entry, no obvious disturbance, which only raised another disturbing possibility. Breasia may never have left willingly, and if she didn't leave willingly, someone else had to be involved, someone she trusted. As the hours turned into days, the search intensified, but behind the scenes, the investigation was quietly pivoting. The focus was narrowing, the margin for coincidence was shrinking. Henry Dinkins was no longer just a worried father figure. He was the center of gravity in a case that was beginning to feel far more deliberate than anyone wanted to believe. And soon, evidence would surface that made one thing terrifyingly clear. Breasia's disappearance wasn't random. It followed a path, and that path led straight back to the man who said he was trying to help. because the more investigators examined Henry's version of events, the less room there was for innocence.
You know what I'm saying? And then
So how long ago has it been, an hour?
it's been a couple hours.
Couple hours?
Couple hours.
Okay.
Couple hours.
Have we called grandmas? Have we called cousins?
That's what I just asked. She the one. I don't know all that. She knows all that.
She called my grandma already.
She
Okay.
knows all that, not me.
Okay. Do we have a picture?
She does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mom.
Yeah. She got the picture, bro. 8 o'clock in the
I'm
morning.
just saying,
That ain't what I
She
said. I
definitely-
never
I
said.
know
Okay,
you
guys,
didn't say
guys,
that.
this isn't the time to fight.
Exactly. I don't give a about you walking. You lost her though. Because you was watching her, Henry. What do you mean?
But hey,
I'm gone, sir. Come on, D.
listen to me.
I'm gone.
Well, you guys gotta come together right now. This isn't a time to fight about it. Okay. Hi there. Are you Andrea?
Yeah,
Okay, Andrea. What's your date of birth, Andrea?
9383.
9383. And this is 2744, number 8.
Yeah.
And what's your phone number?
563.
Yep. So tell me about, like, when was the last time you saw her?
She was here.
When?
What time was that? Probably say like around 11 midnight. She was here. She was in bed sleeping.
Okay. And you guys never heard her come down, walk out? There's no forced entry or anything like that?
No force entry, no.
Okay. Do you mind if I just...
How does a child vanish without a sound, without a struggle, without anyone noticing, unless the silence was intentional? The last night Breasia Terrell was seen alive didn't begin with chaos. It began with normalcy, a familiar apartment, a trusted adult, a routine that no one thought twice about. That's what made the morning so unsettling, because nothing appeared broken, yet everything was wrong. According to Henry Dinkins, the children went to bed as usual. He claimed the apartment was quiet, no disturbances, no late-night movement. When he woke up, Breasia was gone, just gone, as if she had simply dissolved into the night. But children don't disappear in silence. Investigators know this. Parents know this. Anyone who's ever been responsible for a child knows this. 10-year-olds don't leave unfamiliar environments unnoticed. They don't walk out into darkness without fear, and they don't do it without leaving behind questions that demand answers. When police pressed Henry for specifics about the night, exact times, where he slept, when he last checked on the children, his responses blurred. The story stayed intact in outline, but faltered in detail. He couldn't anchor key moments. He couldn't explain how Breasia could have exited without being seen or heard. And then there was DL. Breasia's younger brother was still in the apartment. He hadn't seen her leave. He hadn't heard anything unusual. His account didn't fill the gaps, it widened them. Because if Breasia had left on her own, she would have passed through shared spaces. She would have made noise. She would have woken someone. But she didn't. As the timeline tightened, investigators began comparing Henry's account with external data, surveillance cameras, vehicle movement, known activity in the area. This is where the case shifted from uncertain to alarming. Security footage captured Henry's vehicle moving during hours he hadn't mentioned. Not once, more than once. The footage didn't show Breasia. It didn't show what happened inside the apartment, but it did show something just as important. Henry was active when he claimed to be asleep. His movements contradicted the stillness he described. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a forgotten errand. This was a fracture in the story. When confronted with the footage, Henry adjusted, not dramatically, just enough. He offered new explanations, new timing, new context. Each update attempted to repair the damage. Instead, it confirmed something investigators already suspected. The story was being built around the evidence, not the truth. As detectives reconstructed the night minute by minute, the margin for coincidence disappeared. Breasia didn't vanish randomly. Her disappearance fit into a window of time that aligned too closely with Henry's movements to ignore. And then came the most disturbing realization of all. If Breasia never left on her own, if no one else entered the apartment, if the only adult present was Henry, then the question was no longer where she went, it was what was done to her. Outside, the search continued. Helicopters, volunteers, officers combing through neighborhoods and nearby areas. Posters went up, names were spoken through megaphones. Hope was still alive in public. But inside the investigation, the tone had changed. This was no longer about finding a lost child. It was about proving what had already become painfully clear. Breasia Terrell didn't disappear. She was taken. And the man who said he woke up to an empty apartment was running out of places to hide the truth. Because once investigators knew the night wasn't quiet, they started asking what Henry had been trying so hard to keep silent.
If your child is missing, what do you remember first, or what do you forget? That question sat at the center of Henry Dinkins' interrogation, because the more detectives listened to him speak, the more his behavior clashed with how a worried parent is expected to act. From the moment Henry sat down with police, something felt off. Not explosive, not emotional, just disconnected. His tone stayed flat, his concern sounded rehearsed, and when officers asked him basic questions, the kind most people answer without thinking, his memory suddenly failed him. He couldn't clearly state his own address. He struggled to recall his phone number. These weren't complicated questions. These were anchors, details that ground someone in reality during stress. And yet, Henry floated around them, offering uncertainty where certainty should have existed. Detectives didn't accuse him outright. They didn't need to. They simply kept asking. When was the last time you saw Breasia? What was she wearing? Where exactly were you during the night? Each answer opened a new crack. Breasia's timeline began to bend. He spoke about leaving the apartment, then returning, then leaving again. A trip here, a stop there. But when detectives tried to pin those movements to specific times, everything became vague. I don't remember. I don't know. It was late. Late wasn't enough, because surveillance footage already existed, and it didn't match the story Henry was telling. When detectives subtly referenced his movements, Henry adjusted his narrative just enough to stay afloat, not correcting mistakes, reshaping reality. Each revision raised a critical question. Why change details if nothing is being hidden? And then there was the search itself. Hours passed after Breasia was reported missing. Neighbors hadn't been knocked on. Doors hadn't been checked. There was no urgency in Henry's actions that morning. No frantic calls, no desperate pleading for help. Instead, the drive to search seemed to come from Breasia's mother, not the man who claimed to have raised her. That contrast mattered, because while Henry spoke, Breasia searched. She called family, she demanded answers. Her fear was raw, unfiltered, the kind that doesn't wait to be told what to do. Henry's didn't look like that. Investigators noticed it immediately. When police asked about phone records, calls, and messages from the night and early morning, Henry's demeanor changed. His body language tightened. His words sped up. He offered to show his phone, but resisted any suggestion of downloading or preserving its data. That resistance was quiet, but deliberate. People with nothing to hide don't fear verification. As pressure increased, detectives asked Henry to explain something else, his vehicle. He had arrived at the police station on foot, but he had driven earlier that day.
When asked where the car was, his answers grew evasive. It's around, nearby, reachable. Not parked openly, not brought in voluntarily, found later just a short distance away. That mattered too, because distance creates opportunity, and opportunity creates suspicion. By now, detectives weren't looking for a missing child anymore. They were dissecting behavior. They were watching what Henry remembered, what he forgot, and what he avoided. And the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every time the conversation moved toward verifiable facts, cameras, phones, locations, Henry pulled back. Every time it drifted into emotion or confusion, he leaned in. The mask wasn't falling all at once. It was peeling, layer by layer. And beneath it wasn't panic, it was calculation. Because the more detectives listened, the clearer it became. Henry wasn't trying to find Breasia. He was trying to stay ahead of what they were about to discover. And that discovery was coming faster than he realized.
Listen closely, because sometimes the truth doesn't speak, it watches. If your daughter is missing, where do you go first, and what do you buy? By the time detectives began reviewing external evidence, the case had already shifted. This was no longer about what Henry Dinkins said. It was about what the world around him quietly recorded. Security footage doesn't care about explanations. It doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't forget. Investigators traced Henry's movements beyond the apartment, beyond the interview room, and into places where his story could be tested. What they found created a chilling contradiction between a man searching for a child and a man preparing for something else entirely. On camera, Henry appeared at a store, calm, unrushed, focused. He wasn't buying food. He wasn't asking for help. He wasn't looking lost. Instead, he placed 2 bottles of Clorox bleach into his cart. That single detail changed everything, because bleach doesn't help you find a missing child. It helps you erase something. Detectives didn't jump to conclusions. They didn't have to. They simply placed the footage next to Henry's statements and let the contrast speak for itself. According to Henry, the hours after Breasia vanished were filled with confusion and fear. According to the camera, they were methodical. And cameras don't lie about body language. There was no visible distress, no urgency, no panic, just a man moving through aisles with purpose. That footage became a silent witness, one Henry didn't know he had. As investigators expanded their scope, they looked at the apartment itself. The space belonged to Henry's girlfriend. It was where Breasia had last been seen alive. When officers asked to enter, there was hesitation, not refusal, just delay, long enough to notice, long enough to raise eyebrows. Inside, nothing appeared obviously disturbed, no forced entry, no signs of a struggle, which created another disturbing question. If Breasia left on her own, why hadn't anyone seen her? And then there was the night. According to Henry, he left the apartment multiple times, a visit to a friend, a stop for cigarettes, returns that couldn't be timed, departures that blurred together. Each retelling bent the timeline just slightly. But surveillance doesn't bend. Footage began to outline a different story, one where movements aligned not with searching, but with preparation, with disposal, with control. Investigators also noticed something else when Henry finally reappeared for questioning: his clothing. Most of it was the same, except his shoes. It was a small detail, easy to miss, but detectives didn't miss it, because people don't usually change shoes during a frantic search for a child, unless there's a reason. Mud leaves traces, ground tells stories, and shoes remember where you've been. By now, the thumbnail question, "Is my daughter alive?" felt heavier,
because the actions unfolding on camera didn't reflect hope, they reflected certainty. And certainty only comes from knowing something others don't. The investigation was no longer circling Henry, it was closing in. Every camera frame tightened the noose, every contradiction shortened the distance, and soon detectives would stop asking Henry what might have happened and start uncovering what already had.
Listen closely, because when someone refuses to let go of control, it's usually because control is all they have left. If you were innocent, what would be so dangerous about letting investigators see your phone? By the time detectives turned their attention to Henry Dinkins's phone, the tone of the room had already changed. This was no longer a cooperative conversation. It was a quiet standoff, and Henry seemed to sense it. Phones tell stories people forget they've written. Every call, every search, every place you've been when you thought no one was watching. When detectives asked for access, not even full access, just call logs and text times, Henry's demeanor shifted. His voice tightened, his movements slowed. The confidence he'd shown earlier gave way to something sharper, defensive, calculated. He said he had nothing to hide. Then he refused to give the passcode. He offered a compromise instead. He would unlock the phone, he would hold it, he would decide what they could see, and when they were done, he would lock it again. That wasn't cooperation, that was control. Detectives watched closely as Henry fumbled, stalled, and claimed to forget his own password. He glanced at the screen too often, shielded it with his body, asked why they were watching him so closely. Because people don't worry about being watched unless there's something they're afraid of being seen. The room went quiet. A map was placed on the table. Henry was asked to mark where he had driven while searching for Breasia. The marker sat untouched. No lines, no locations, no effort. When the detective stepped out briefly to retrieve the phone, something strange happened. Henry didn't move. He didn't study the map. He didn't prepare his explanation. He just sat there, still, tense, waiting. When the detective returned, Henry's anxiety spiked. He insisted again that he would unlock the phone himself. He refused to hand it over. He accused the detective of staring at him too closely, as if observation itself were a threat. And that reaction mattered, because earlier Henry claimed he couldn't remember times, addresses, even his own phone number. But now, suddenly, memory wasn't the issue. Privacy was. The phone remained locked, but the damage was already done. Investigators didn't need immediate access to know what this meant. Innocent people want clarity, they want help, they want answers. Henry wanted boundaries. Shortly after, detectives made another discovery: the car. Henry had told them he came straight to the station, but the vehicle he'd been driving wasn't there. When pressed, his explanations twisted. He said it was around, then reachable, then somewhere nearby. It was eventually found just 1 block away, close enough to walk, far enough to avoid scrutiny. Why abandon the car? Why hide it? Cars carry evidence, dirt, fibers, smells, and Henry had already changed his shoes. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. The title, "He Murdered His Daughter and Truly Believed He'd Outsmart Justice," was no longer just dramatic framing. It was becoming a psychological profile. Because Henry didn't act like a man hoping for the best. He acted like a man trying to stay ahead. And the phone, still locked, still guarded, remained the one place he couldn't afford to let investigators inside. But eventually, time does what pressure cannot. And when that phone finally spoke, it would confirm that Breasia hadn't vanished. She had been taken.
Listen carefully, because this is the moment where silence stopped protecting him. What happens when the evidence speaks louder than the person who's been lying all along? Even though Henry Dinkins managed to keep his phone locked that day, investigators were no longer dependent on his cooperation. By this point, the case had moved beyond interviews and inconsistencies. It had entered a phase where facts no longer needed permission. Search warrants were issued, and once they were, everything Henry had tried to control began slipping away. When investigators eventually gained access to his digital history, what they found wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't circumstantial. It was deeply disturbing. Searches that had nothing to do with a missing child, content that raised immediate red flags, patterns that aligned far too closely with what detectives already feared. This wasn't the behavior of a frantic father figure searching for answers. It was the behavior of someone with a secret life, one he desperately didn't want examined. At the same time, investigators turned their attention to Henry's RV, the place he hadn't wanted discussed, the place that sat just outside the neat narrative he'd tried to present. Inside, they found items that no longer fit any innocent explanation. Bleach, weapons, evidence suggesting preparation, not panic. And then came the testimony that removed all remaining doubt. While Henry sat in jail, convinced he'd said just enough and revealed just little enough, he spoke to the wrong person. A cellmate, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain by telling the truth. According to that cellmate, Henry made a chilling remark. He said they would never find her. That sentence mattered, because hope doesn't talk like that. Grief doesn't talk like that. Only certainty does. Months later, Henry was proven wrong. A body was discovered in a wooded area near DeWitt, Iowa, roughly 20 miles from where Breasia Terrell was last seen. The location was isolated, hidden, chosen. DNA confirmed what everyone had been dreading. It was Breasia. Investigators pieced together what they believe happened that night based strictly on evidence, movement patterns, and testimony, not speculation. Henry left the apartment with Breasia while others slept. At some point, he took her to his RV. Later, his girlfriend Andrea told investigators she woke around 3:30 a.m. and noticed both of them were gone. When Henry returned briefly, she saw him go into the closet and grab something. She didn't know what it was. She didn't ask. She later admitted she looked out the window and saw Breasia outside near the car. That moment mattered too, because if Breasia was alive then, if she was seen, that meant her disappearance wasn't a mystery. It was a decision. Security footage later showed Henry stopping at a gas station in the early hours of the morning. After that, the trail went dark. Investigators believe he drove to the wooded area, led Breasia down a steep embankment toward a secluded pond, and shot her. The physical evidence supported that conclusion. So did the condition of the scene. Henry's car became stuck in the mud, forcing him to walk back, explaining the shoes he changed before speaking to police. And the final confirmation came from someone Henry had tried to protect by lying. His son, DL. DL told investigators that instead of searching, his father stopped at Walmart, that he stayed in the car, that Henry came back carrying bleach and a large knife. Those details matched the evidence already collected. There was no room left for denial. Henry Dinkins was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. He received 2 mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole. In the end, the title wasn't exaggerated. He truly believed he could outsmart justice. But justice didn't need him to confess. It just needed time.
and Breasia Terrell, 10 years old, was finally heard.